I'd always wanted to visit the Pacific Northwest, and I found this amazing deal on Airbnb for a cute little cottage just outside the city. The photos looked great. All rustic charm with modern amenities, and the host had stellar reviews. I was psyched. I flew into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport on a Friday afternoon. The plan was to spend a week exploring the city and surrounding areas. I picked up my rental car and plugged the address into my GPS. It was about a 45-minute drive from the airport, which I didn't mind because I was enjoying the scenery. As I got further from the city, the road started getting narrower and more winding. The trees seemed to close in on both sides, and I noticed there were fewer and fewer houses. I started to get a little nervous, wondering if I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. But nope. My GPS insisted I was on the right track. Finally, after what felt like forever, I turned onto a gravel road that led to the cottage. It was pretty secluded, set back from the road and surrounded by towering evergreens. At first glance, it looked just like the photos. A charming log cabin with a small porch and flower boxes in the windows. I parked and got out of the car, stretching after the long drive. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Like eerily quiet. No traffic noise, no neighbors, not even many birds chirping. Just the sound of the wind in the trees. I shrugged it off, figuring this was just what nature sounded like when you're used to city living. The host had sent me instructions for the lockbox, so I retrieved the key and let myself in. The inside of the cottage was cute, if a bit musty smelling. It looked like it hadn't been aired out in a while, but everything seemed clean, and all the promised amenities were there. A small kitchen, a living room with a fireplace, and a loft bedroom upstairs. I brought in my bags and started to unpack. That's when I noticed the first weird thing. There was a small desk in the corner of the living room, and on it was a stack of papers. Curious, I went over to take a look. They were all printouts of missing person flyers dating back several years. All young women, all last seen in the Seattle area. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I told myself it was probably just research for a true crime podcast or something. Still, it was pretty creepy. I decided to take a shower to wash off the travel grime and hopefully shake off the uneasy feeling I was getting. The bathroom was tiny, but functional. As I was showering, I could have sworn I heard footsteps on the porch outside. I turned off the water and listened hard, but there was nothing. Just my imagination playing tricks on me, I figured. After my shower, I was feeling hungry, so I decided to head into the nearest town to grab some dinner and groceries. The host had left a list of recommended restaurants and shops, so I picked one that sounded good. It was about a 20-minute drive to the small town of North Bend. The diner I chose was pretty empty, just a couple of locals at the counter. I sat down and ordered a burger and fries. While I was waiting for my food, I struck up a conversation with the waitress, just making small talk about the area and asking for recommendations on things to see. When I mentioned I was staying at an Airbnb outside of town, her whole demeanor changed. She got really quiet and asked me which one. I described the cottage, and she exchanged a look with the cook that made my stomach drop. I asked what was wrong, and she hesitated before telling me that there had been some strange occurrences out that way. Nothing concrete, she said. Just weird stories from other tourists. People feeling like they were being watched, unexplained noises at night, that sort of thing. I laughed it off, saying I was sure it was just city folks not used to the sounds of nature. But internally, I was freaking out a little. I asked if she knew anything about the owner of the cottage. She shook her head, saying he wasn't a local, just someone who bought the property a few years back as a vacation rental. I finished my meal quickly, suddenly eager to get back to the cottage before it got dark. I stopped at a small grocery store to pick up some essentials, then headed back. The whole drive, I couldn't shake the waitress's words from my mind. I kept telling myself I was being silly, that there was nothing to worry about. When I got back to the cottage, everything looked normal. No sign of anyone else around. I brought in my groceries and decided to build a fire in the fireplace to make things cozy. As I was arranging the logs, I noticed something odd. There were scratches on the inside of the fireplace, like someone had tried to claw their way out. I told myself it was probably just animal scratches, maybe from a raccoon or something that had gotten stuck in there at some point. But it didn't look like animal scratches. I got the fire going and tried to relax, but I couldn't stop thinking about those scratches, the missing person flyers, the waitress's warning. I decided to distract myself by watching a movie on my laptop. I queued up a comedy, hoping it would lighten my mood. About halfway through the movie, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps on the gravel driveway. I paused the movie and listened. The footsteps seemed to be circling the cottage. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I got up and peeked out the window, but it was too dark to see anything. I debated calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I heard footsteps. I didn't want to seem like a paranoid tourist. Instead, I double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked. As I was checking the back door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were muddy footprints on the porch, footprints that weren't there earlier when I'd come back from town. Now thoroughly freaked out, I grabbed my phone to call the police. That's when I realized I had no cell service. Of course, I was in the middle of nowhere. I looked for a landline, but there wasn't one in the cottage. I was starting to panic. Should I make a run for my car? But what if someone was out there waiting? I decided to stay put and barricade myself in. I pushed the heavy coffee table in front of the front door and wedged chairs under the doorknobs of the back door and the bathroom window. Then I grabbed the biggest knife I could find from the kitchen and sat with my back to the wall, facing the doors. The night seemed to stretch on forever. Every creak of the house settling, every rustle of leaves outside made me jump. A couple of times I was sure I heard someone trying the doorknobs, but nothing happened. No one broke in. As the first light of dawn started to filter through the windows, I finally relaxed a little. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, it was fully light outside. I got up, muscles aching from sitting in one position all night, and cautiously looked out the windows. Nothing seemed out of place. The muddy footprints on the back porch were gone. Had I imagined them? I decided I couldn't stay there another night. I quickly packed up my things, my hands shaking the whole time. As I was doing a final sweep to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything, I noticed something that made my heart stop. The stack of missing person flyers on the desk. They were in a different order than I remembered. And on top was a new one. A flyer with my photo on it, my name, and yesterday's date as the date I went missing. I've never moved so fast in my life. I was in my car and driving away within minutes. I called the police as soon as I had cell service again, but they were skeptical. They said they'd look into it. But without any concrete evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. I gave them all the information I had about the Airbnb listing and the host. I later found out that the Airbnb account was fake, created using stolen identity information. The real owner of the property had no idea it was being rented out. He thought it had been sitting empty since he inherited it from his uncle a few years back. The police did a thorough search of the cottage and the surrounding woods. but they never found any evidence to support my story. No missing person flyers, no scratches in the fireplace, nothing. To this day, I don't know what really happened that night. Was it all in my imagination? A cruel prank? Or something more sinister? I've tried to find other people who might have stayed at that cottage, but the listing was taken down immediately after I reported it, and Airbnb couldn't share information about other guests. The whole experience has made me much more aware of personal safety when traveling. I always make sure someone knows where I am and when to expect to hear from me. I research areas thoroughly before booking accommodations, and I trust my instincts. If something feels off, I don't ignore that feeling anymore. I still love to travel, to explore new places and meet new people. But I do it with a new awareness now, a constant vigilance that I never had before. Some might call it paranoia, but I prefer to think of it as being prepared. Because you never know when you might find yourself in a situation like I did, alone in the woods with nothing but your wits to rely on. After a stressful year at work, I decided to take a solo trip to clear my mind. I booked a week at an Airbnb in a remote part of the Catskills in New York. The listing was for a modern cabin with all the amenities, surrounded by dense forest, promising a peaceful, quiet retreat away from the hustle and bustle of city life. I arrived at the cabin on a Friday afternoon. The drive up the mountain was beautiful, with leaves changing colors and the crisp autumn air. The cabin itself was stunning, sleek, modern architecture with large windows offering breathtaking views of the forest. The host had left a welcome note along with some local recommendations and a basket of snacks, which was a nice touch. The first evening was serene. I cooked a simple dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on the deck watching the sun set over the trees. As the sky darkened, I marveled at the clarity of the stars, something you rarely see in the city. It felt like I was in a different world, one where I could finally relax. The next morning, I decided to explore the nearby trails. The host had mentioned a few good hiking spots, so I packed a small backpack and set out. The forest was peaceful, and I felt invigorated by the fresh air and exercise. I lost track of time and ended up hiking for most of the day, only returning to the cabin as the sun was starting to set. That evening, as I settled in with a book by the fireplace, I noticed a faint light flickering through the trees. It seemed far away, but it caught my attention. I thought it might be another cabin or perhaps campers, so I didn't think much of it. I continued reading until I was too tired to keep my eyes open and then went to bed. Around midnight, I was awakened by the sound of my phone ringing. Groggy and confused, I checked the caller ID, but it was an unknown number. I answered, but there was only silence on the other end. After a few moments, the call disconnected. Feeling a bit uneasy, I checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked before going back to bed. The next day, I decided to stay closer to the cabin and enjoy the amenities. I spent the morning lounging on the deck with a cup of coffee and the afternoon reading and napping in the hammock. By evening, I felt completely relaxed. As the sun set, I saw the faint light flickering through the trees again, but it seemed a bit closer this time. I shrugged it off as my imagination and went inside to prepare dinner. After dinner, I was watching a movie when my phone rang again. It was the same unknown number. This time I let it go to voicemail, but no message was left. A sense of unease settled over me. I decided to call the host to see if they knew of anyone else in the area, or if there had been any issues with prank calls. The host reassured me that the area was very safe and that there were no other cabins nearby. They suggested it might be a wrong number and told me to call them if I needed anything. Feeling somewhat reassured, I tried to enjoy the rest of the evening, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I went to bed early, hoping to get a good night's sleep. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone ringing again. It was the same unknown number. This time curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. There was a brief silence, followed by a distorted voice whispering my name. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The call disconnected before I could respond. Terrified, I double-checked all the locks and windows, making sure everything was secure. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, every creak of the cabin making me jump. As dawn broke, I decided I couldn't stay another night. I packed up my things and left the cabin, feeling a mix of fear and relief. On the drive back to the city, I received another call from the unknown number. I didn't answer, but this time a voicemail was left. With my heart racing, I played the message. It was the same distorted voice, whispering that they were watching me. I immediately called the police and reported the incidents. They took my report seriously and promised to investigate. I also contacted Airbnb to inform them of the situation. They were very understanding and assured me they would work with the police and the host to get to the bottom of it. Back in the safety of my apartment, I tried to move on from the experience, but the memory of the distorted voice and the flickering lights haunted me. I became more cautious, always double-checking locks and looking over my shoulder. The peaceful retreat I had hoped for had turned into a nightmare, leaving me shaken and wary. As I tried to go about my daily life, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I walked down the street, I found myself glancing behind me, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. At night, I would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that I had heard the distorted voice again. My once comfortable apartment now felt like a prison, with every sound and shadow magnified by my paranoia. One evening, a few weeks after the trip, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The city streets were busy, and the noise was a welcome distraction from my thoughts. As I walked past a cafe, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out to see an unknown number calling me. My heart skipped a beat as I hesitated to answer. Finally, I took a deep breath and picked up the call. I said hello, trying to keep my voice steady. There was silence on the other end, just like before. My pulse quickened as I waited for the distorted voice to speak. Instead, I heard a series of clicks, and then the call disconnected. I stood there, staring at my phone, feeling a mix of frustration and fear. What did this person want from me? Why were they tormenting me? Determined to take control of the situation, I called the police again and updated them on the latest call. They assured me that they were investigating and would do everything they could to find the person responsible. Despite their reassurances, I felt a sense of hopelessness. It seemed like, no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the shadow of that trip to the Catskills. In an attempt to regain some normalcy, I threw myself into my work. Late nights at the office became my refuge, a place where I could focus on something other than my fears. My colleagues noticed the change in me, but I brushed off their concerns, not wanting to burden them with my troubles. One night, as I was leaving the office, I received another call from the unknown number. This time, I didn't answer. Instead, I let it go to voicemail and then played the message. The distorted voice was back, whispering my name, followed by a chilling statement that they knew where I was. Panic washed over me as I looked around the empty office building. I hurried to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. Once inside, I locked the doors and drove home, constantly checking my mirrors to see if I was being followed. When I finally reached my apartment, I double-checked all the locks and windows before collapsing onto the couch, my mind racing. Unable to sleep, I decided to do some research on the internet. I searched for similar cases of harassment and found stories of people who had been stalked for years. The more I read, the more terrified I became. It seemed like there was no escape from this nightmare. The next morning, I called my friend Sarah, who had initially suggested the trip. I hadn't told her about what had been happening, not wanting to worry her. But now I needed someone to talk to. Sarah listened intently as I recounted the events, her concern growing with each detail. Sarah insisted that I needed to get out of there and come stay with her for a while. She assured me that together we would figure this out. Grateful for her support, I packed a bag and drove to Sarah's place. The change of scenery was a relief, and having someone to talk to helped alleviate some of my anxiety. We spent hours discussing the situation, trying to piece together any clues that might help identify the stalker. One evening, Sarah suggested we go back to the cabin in the Catskills to see if we could find any evidence that might have been missed. At first I was hesitant. The thought of returning to that place filled me with dread. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it might be the only way to get some answers. We planned the trip for the following weekend. As we drove up the mountain, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The cabin looked just as I remembered it, serene and peaceful against the backdrop of the forest. But now it held a sinister undertone that I couldn't ignore. We spent the first day exploring the surrounding area, looking for any signs of the person who had been harassing me. We found nothing unusual, just the same beautiful scenery that had initially drawn me to the cabin. As the sun set, we decided to focus on the cabin itself. We combed through every room, looking for anything that might have been missed during my initial stay. In the attic, Sarah found a small box hidden behind some old furniture. Inside, we discovered a collection of photographs and personal items that seemed to belong to different people. Among them, I found a picture of myself taken during my stay at the cabin. My heart raced as I realized someone had been watching me the entire time. With this new evidence, we called the police and reported our findings. The officers who arrived were shocked by the discovery and assured us they would do everything in their power to catch the person responsible. Despite their reassurances, I felt a deep sense of violation and fear. Sarah and I returned to her place, and I tried to resume some semblance of a normal life. The police investigation continued, but weeks turned into months with no resolution. The phone calls stopped, but the fear remained, a constant shadow over my life. Despite the fear and anxiety, I refused to let the experience define me. I continued to travel, but with a heightened sense of vigilance and awareness. The world was still a beautiful place, but I had learned the hard way that it also held dangers I couldn't ignore. I found an Airbnb in Joshua Tree, California. The photos showed a beautiful modern house with large windows that provided panoramic views of the desert landscape. It seemed like the perfect place to disconnect and recharge. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The house was even more stunning in person. The architecture blended seamlessly with the natural surroundings, and the view was breathtaking. There was no one around for miles, which was exactly what I needed, or so I thought. The first evening was magical. I sat on the deck sipping wine as the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. As night fell, the stars came out in full force, more vibrant than I had ever seen in the city. I felt a deep sense of peace and solitude. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to explore the nearby Joshua Tree National Park. The trails were beautiful, and I spent the entire day hiking, completely lost in the beauty of nature. It was late afternoon by the time I got back to the house, exhausted but happy. As I approached the house, I noticed something strange. The sliding glass door that led to the deck was slightly open. I was sure I had closed and locked it before leaving. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I had been careless in my rush to leave that morning. Inside, everything seemed normal. My belongings were untouched, and there was no sign of a break-in. Still, the open door nagged at me. I double-checked all the locks and windows just to be safe. I spent the evening watching movies, trying to relax, but my mind kept drifting back to that open door. That night I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing faint noises, creaks and rustles that seemed out of place in the otherwise silent desert. I told myself it was just the house settling or the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Eventually I drifted off into a fitful sleep. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, heart pounding. There it was again, that faint, rustling sound. It seemed to be coming from outside, near the back of the house. I lay still, straining to hear more clearly. The sound was irregular, like someone or something was moving around outside. Summoning my courage, I got up and peered through the blinds. In the dim light, I could make out a shadowy figure near the edge of the property. My heart raced. Who could be out there in the middle of the night, in such a remote area? I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator assured me that a patrol car would be sent to check the area, but it might take some time due to the remote location. I stayed on the line, feeling a bit more secure with someone to talk to. The rustling continued intermittently, but the figure didn't seem to be getting any closer. I tried to stay calm, focusing on my breathing. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the flashing lights of a police car approaching. I breathed a sigh of relief as the officers arrived and began searching the area. They found no one. The officers told me that it was likely a transient or someone passing through, but they assured me they would patrol the area throughout the night. I thanked them and locked the door behind them, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. The next morning, I was exhausted but determined not to let the previous night ruin my trip. I decided to stay close to the house, enjoying the amenities and the view. I spent the day lounging by the pool, trying to relax, but my mind kept drifting back to the shadowy figure. That evening, as the sun set, I noticed something odd in the distance. There was a faint glimmer of light, like a reflection, coming from the direction where I had seen the figure the night before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate before it got too dark. I walked cautiously towards the source of the light, my heart pounding with each step. As I got closer, I saw what looked like an old, abandoned trailer partially hidden among the rocks and brush. The reflection was coming from a broken mirror hanging on the side. The trailer looked like it had been there for years. I peered inside, expecting to find it empty, but instead I found signs of recent habitation. A sleeping bag, some canned food, and a pile of clothes. Someone had been living here, and it looked like they had left in a hurry. A chill ran down my spine. Had the person I saw last night been living here? And if so, why had they been lurking around my rental? I snapped a few pictures with my phone and hurried back to the house, my mind racing with possibilities. I called the police again, reporting what I had found. The officers arrived quickly this time, and I showed them the trailer. They agreed that it looked like someone had been living there recently, but there was no sign of the person now. They assured me they would keep an eye on the area and suggested I stay somewhere else for the night. Not wanting to cut my trip short, I decided to book a room at a hotel in town. I packed a bag and left the house, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. This was not how I had envisioned my peaceful retreat. At the hotel, I finally felt safe enough to get a good night's sleep. The next morning I checked out and decided to head back to the house to pack up and leave for good. As I arrived, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The sliding glass door was open again. Inside, the house looked undisturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I quickly gathered my things and left, determined not to spend another night in that house. As I drove away, I felt a sense of relief, but also a deep sense of unease. Who had been lurking around that remote house, and why? I couldn't help but feel that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. When I got home, I contacted Airbnb and reported the incidents. They assured me they would investigate and offered me a refund for the remaining nights. I also shared my experience in a review, hoping to warn future guests. Months passed, and I tried to put the experience behind me. But every now and then, I would think about that shadowy figure and the abandoned trailer. I wondered who they were and what they had wanted. The mystery remained unsolved, a dark cloud over what should have been a relaxing getaway. One day, I received a call from the police. They had found the person living in the trailer, a drifter with a history of petty crimes. He had been arrested for trespassing on another property nearby. The officers assured me that he was no longer a threat, but the experience had left a lasting impression on me. Now I still loved to travel, but I was more careful about where I stayed and always made sure to research the area thoroughly. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes the scariest ones are the ones that are all too real. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.